What's going on, y'all? Welcome back to another episode where we're talking about some of the major headlines that have taken place in the news. To name a few, the conflict that has been ongoing with Iran has been completely dominating all the major headlines that you've seen recently, as well as a attempted cover-up of a terrorist attack in New York City, and even some talk about NIL within college athletics. So let's get right into it. Now, the country of Iran has been very controversial recently, especially recently, but for an ongoing duration, they have been known for being adversarial towards the United States and Western countries in general. And whenever we talk about another country on this program, we always give a bit of a profile into what it is that's going on within that country. So just some brief history on Iran. In 1979, they had a working class revolution that overthrew their government. Now, they were motivated by things like economic development, creating disparities within the wealth that was being held by different people, as well as the increasing influence that the country was seeing around the world, specifically from the US and the UK. And ultimately, they replaced their existing monarchy with an Islamic theocracy. Now, before the revolution, Iran had the number 17 GDP in the world. Now, what does the country look like today? Well, they have a GDP per capita of $5,190 as of 2024. This is one third of the mean GDP per capita across the world. So this is very much a below average wealthy country, more so on the sides of a poorer country. They have a human development index of 0.799, which ranks them 75th in the world. So very much average development. They have a corruption perception index of 23 out of 100. This ties them with countries like Lebanon, Eswatini, and the Congo, which are countries very much known for high degrees of corruption. So this is very much a corrupt country. They have a Freedom House score of 11 out of 100, placing them in between Cuba and Russia. So very much, not only are they a corrupt country, they are also a people who are completely oppressed by their government. And as of currently, they have the 44th highest GDP out of any country in the world. So again, pre-revolution, they were 17th and now they're 44th. So this is a country that has been taking some major steps backward over time, particularly since their revolution. Now, in terms of the conflict that has been ongoing with the US, well, Iran has been designated a state sponsor of terrorism by the US since 1984, which joins only three other countries that have this same designation, being Cuba, North Korea, and Syria. As recently as this past summer, on June 21st, the US initiated the Operation Midnight Hammer. Now, what this was were US strikes on two key strategic Iranian nuclear facilities. They dropped 14 advanced bunker buster bombs to create a major setback for Iran in their nuclear weapons development. Now, Iran came out and claimed that the US would receive a response for having done so, and as well as the other countries that helped the US facilitate this operation. And very soon after Iran restarted their nuclear development programs, which was exactly what the US told them not to do. And there were a long series of negotiations between these countries, namely the US and Iran, as well as some others like Israel as well. And the goal was to prevent Iran from pursuing nuclear capabilities. However, nothing that was offered to Iran was accepted, and ultimately that is what has now started this recent conflict. The well, within this conflict, the supreme leader of Iran, his replacement, and many of the high-ranking officials that have been promulgating the Iranian regime have been wiped out by U.S. and Israeli strikes. The objective of these missions is to destroy Iranians' drone and missile production facilities, to end their nuclear ambitions, and ultimately to dilute the influence that Iran has in global terror. And the president, the secretary of war, the secretary of state have all been giving updates recently, have been holding press conferences to give more insight into what's going on, into the success of this mission. And as recently as 2 days ago, Donald Trump held a press conference, and I'll even insert some of what he had to say talking about the objective in Iran.
We're achieving major strides toward completing our military objective. And some people could say they're pretty well complete. We've wiped every single force in Iran out very completely. Most of Iran's naval power has been sunk. It's on the bottom of the sea. It's almost 50 ships. I was just notified it's 51 ships. I didn't know they had that many. Didn't last very long. And these are fighting vessels. They're meant to fight, but they're not meant to fight against us. We continue to target Iran's drone and missile capabilities. Their drones are way down. Their drone manufacturing has been hit starting today. We know all of the places they manufacture the drones, and they're being hit one after another. Their missile capability is down to about 10%, maybe less. We're also hitting where they make missiles and where they deliver missiles. We've struck over 5,000 targets to date, some of them very major targets.
Now, the U.S. claims for this to be a short-term operation, and as you can tell, they believe that it's nearly complete and that many of the key sites that we have targeted have been eliminated, that many of the capacities that Iran holds militarily, particularly with their navy, have been taken out as well. However, I do think there is something to worry about as an American. Um, Even though I do have a great deal of confidence that this administration will be able to successfully carry out this mission and do so in a quick amount of time. However, there is the worry that, when our officials say, well, this is only going to be a few weeks, that, well, what happens if it turns out to be a few years? And then we get in this prolonged conflict. We lose a high number of lives overseas with our troops having to carry out a prolonged operation. And so, though I do feel confident that that won't be the case, there still is that worry in the back of the minds of millions of Americans that, well, what if it does turn out to be that way? And also, let's say we do successfully carry out this mission and we eliminate their drone, their missile capabilities, we set them back many years in terms of any sort of development. Well, what if that doesn't change the direction that Iran is going in? What if they just continue to just restart these programs as soon as they get eliminated? with no prospect for change. So I think that's the other worry that many Americans may be sharing is that no matter what it is we do, they're still going to be developing weapons and then pointing them in our direction. So, with all that being said, there's certainly a lot to consider regarding this current conflict that's taking place in the Middle East. And certainly, uh, there is a big question mark when it comes to the future direction of Iranian politics. However, let's keep it moving to our next story, which was the Mamdani and media attempted cover-up of an attempted bombing outside the mayor's mansion. Now, recently there was an anti-Islam protest that was organized at the Gracie Mansion in New York City, which is the residence of the New York mayor. During this protest, there was a counter protest that began to form, and there was, um, at first it seemed to be just your standard protest with counter protest, people trying to get their points across, this and that. And there's even a clip of what had happened, but ultimately there were a couple of um, poorly influenced young men who decided it would be their big move to bring some homemade bombs to this protest and to ultimately throw them into a crowd of people. Now, these two men are the children of immigrants who were brought here from the Middle East, who have been radicalized into promoting certain Islamic uh, radicalism. It turns out that these men were inspired by ISIS, and they came to that protest that day with the intention to spread what it is that the Muslims, and particularly those who subscribe to uh, the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria, have to promote. Now, and the big hypocrisy in the whole thing is you have this soy boy white dude who's sitting there with his megaphone and he's screaming how, we need to accept these people into our city and New York City's a home to everyone. And while he's in the middle of screaming all this, this kid jumps over his shoulder and throws a bomb and yells Allahu Akbar. So it just really shows how the left just has a complete lack of awareness when it comes to the issue of mass migration, and it also goes to expose the poor job that's being done in creating filters on who's coming to the United States, where they're coming from, what they believe, and the potential radicalization of certain people from certain parts of the world. Now, as I mentioned, this suspect, well, I guess he's been charged now by federal investigators. Now, this is a child of immigrants from Afghanistan. Now, if anyone is under the impression that Afghanistan is not home to an array of radicalized Islamic groups, well, then they'd be sadly mistaken. And so I think this creates an opportunity for people to rethink their position on immigration and what countries we should be more heavily scrutinizing when we accept immigrants from that country. However, following this attack, various news outlets, and particularly the mayor himself, decided it would be wise to link the bombing to the protesters who were there promoting anti-Islamic rhetoric. Now, Mamdani posted on X that the protest was white supremacy and racism and bigotry, and further linked the bombing to those ideals. And there were various media outlets that suggested the bomber was just an activist, or that this was actually an assassination attempt on Mamdani. Again, trying to spin the narrative as though this bombing was carried out by the anti-Islam protesters as opposed to the Muslims themselves. And so, again, this just really goes to show the current state of progressivism in the US, how, time and time again, reality is proving their entire narrative wrong. And so they have to then completely twist the narrative to make it seem like the bad things that are happening by their side are actually happening from the other side. And so it's just, it's complete malpractice being done by these journalists and certainly by the mayor who's been very openly um, encouraged by the fact that he's the first Muslim mayor of New York City. And so whenever there's a terrorist attack promulgated by Islamic radicalism, of course he's not going to be able to admit that Islam is a major problem facing the world. Now, with all that being said, our final story, and perhaps a bit of a more lighthearted story, something a little easier to digest. The president hosted a roundtable recently to discuss the issue of name, image, and likeness controversies surrounding the NCAA. Now, and he was even asked, why is this in the middle of the Iran situation and all that's going on, why is this the time to talk about it? And he said, because it's important. So and you know what? I agree. It is something that has been very important, certainly within the sports world, and particularly within college sports, which is really one of the major pillars of American culture, is college athletics. So why not talk about it? And this roundtable was attended by some of the more high-ranking officials within U.S. politics. Trump was there, Marco Rubio was there, Ron DeSantis was there, and there were many notable figures within the athletics world. The president of the NCAA, Charlie Baker, was there. Former Alabama coach Nick Saban was there. Well, really, former LSU coach who then became the Alabama coach after his stint in the NFL. But nonetheless, Nick Saban was there. And what they were talking about was a piece of legislation that has gotten some debate called the SCORE Act. And what the SCORE Act does is it codifies a lot of the um, principles that were put forward by the recent settlement called House versus NCAA, which was an antitrust settlement worth nearly $3 billion dollars back in 2025. And the decision allows for collegiate athletes to receive direct compensation from NCAA athletic programs. Now, within this bill, there are protections for players' ability to enter into these NIL agreements. There are further protections for players to obtain a talent agent. Um, and again, it's really an attempt to codify the law that's set forth by the House versus NCAA settlement. Now, something that's created a lot of confusion within NIL is how it's being handled currently through where it's being done more so state by state, and this would create a federal framework so that way there's less of that confusion. Because, I mean, you've got schools in all 50 states, and even within athletic conferences. every conference has schools that are within different states. So it creates this major headache and all kinds of confusion the way it's being done state by state currently, whereas it would create a more stable system if it were to be made a federal law, which, of course, is not true of every issue. There are certain times where it does make more sense for things to be state by state, and this is one of those instances where it makes more sense for it to be done federally. Again, within this bill, there's talk about revenue sharing of up to 22% of revenue can be spent on NIL, which begs a different question of, well, 22% of the revenue at a school like Texas or Georgia or LSU is a lot different from the 22% of revenue at, a mid-major school, a smaller school. Here in Louisiana, we've got plenty of smaller Division One schools. Like, again, 22% of revenue at Southeastern is not going to be the same thing as 22% of revenue at Louisiana State. And so ultimately what happens is you get a further widening of the gap between big schools, medium schools, and small schools, just simply based on the revenue they're able to generate. Let's say you're, a kid from a small town and you want to play football at your hometown school. Well, here comes the big state school knocking on your door with, hundreds of thousands of dollars. Well, what reason do you have left to stay at that small school and promote your hometown? So you're going to see, again, the further widening of that gap between schools who can generate revenue and schools that can't. Furthermore, this limits the agent compensation to 5% of these deals. And furthermore, it adds Title IX protections within this bill. Some pros and cons to the passing of this legislation. Again, this provides a more comprehensive framework for the NCAA and its member institutions when handling these NIL agreements. Again, it stabilizes the power conference's ability to provide student athletes with these deals. Further, more than just simply offering the framework, it creates stability within a system that has been described as the Wild West of college athletics. And again, provides safeguards for preventing certain exploitations of student athletes. Some of the cons, again, as I mentioned, it further separates that gap between these big, medium, and small schools based on the revenue that they're able to generate. And something that I've even heard used by different administrators within college athletics is that the big fish eat the small fish every single time. And, again, this is just going to be another example of, your schools like Alabama are going to get, not only do they already have first choice when it comes to recruitment over schools like, Alabama State, University of Southern Alabama, and schools like that, this gives them even more of a reason to have that first choice. Now, this was something that happened when Title IX was passed, and I'm certainly in favor of providing female student athletes with the same opportunities as male student athletes. But when it comes to the reality of what has happened because of that, you saw this same thing happen, that the top schools created a greater amount of separation between them and the other and all other schools being small and medium-sized schools. And what Title IX did was it made it to where every male student athlete taken on by a school, there had to be a female student athlete taken on by the school. And what that caused to have happen is that many male sports were eliminated to add new female sports. However, something that is just true is that male sports generate more revenue. And for these smaller schools to eliminate revenue generating sports to add sports that may not create that same amount of revenue, it certainly limited their ability to provide, um, a higher amount of winning teams because now they have less money to sign coaches with, to recruit players with, so on and so forth. Whereas, again, a school like Texas or Alabama or LSU, schools like that can afford for that to happen. And they're certainly not going to complain if the other schools within their state are now limited to an extent to where they can't afford to facilitate the same operations, whereas the bigger schools can still afford to do so. And so again, you're seeing that separation between big and small schools. And now with NIL, you're seeing that separation continue to grow. Um, again, this leaves little reason for a small town kid to go to their hometown school to play when the school's able to offer them more than simply a scholarship. If you're coming at someone from a small town with, six, seven figures in your hand, they're going to take it. That's what would make the most sense for that player's career to develop. Whereas before, they could only offer things like scholarships, where any school can offer a player a scholarship, whether it's a big or a small school. But, a school with, eight, nine, 10,000 students can't really generate enough revenue to hand a player $1 million. Furthermore, um, the payment of these deals to college players prevents them from moving on to the professional level. Something, you take a sport like baseball, where a player may get drafted and then play in single A, double A, triple A, where they might be making, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars, where really the main check that they're getting is from the signing bonus that they got when they got drafted. And now they're able to actually make more money if they stay in college than if they were to play in the minor leagues. Or even take, basketball, for example, where players would be able to make more in college than they would in the G League. And the sport that generates the most in NIL deals is football, where, a lot of times these rookie contracts aren't the same amount of money as some of their NIL deals. You're seeing stories of these quarterbacks getting, $10 million to go play at these Power Five conference schools where they're just not going to get that same amount of money playing on a rookie contract in the NFL. So at a certain point, it becomes a bit of a calculation of, well, am I going to be able to make more through NIL, or am I going to be making more on a rookie contract playing professional? And I think in a lot of cases, these players are choosing to, maybe that they stay for their fifth year of eligibility in college and to spend, age 23 in college and double what they would make had they entered the draft after their year four of eligibility. And so, again, this creates another issue of where the talent is being distributed between college and professional sports. Now, with all that being said, we do find ourselves at the end of another great episode. I thank you for your time listening to what it is I have to say, and I certainly hope to see you again in the near future. My name is Brett Cody Fornatoro. It was a pleasure talking to you, and I'll see you in the next episode.